The Search for Justice, Libertines in the 18th Century. While reading sentimental novels of the 18th century, I noticed that, while the seduced women were left to die, the seducer, or libertine, suffered no real sentence, underwent no real punishment. If the pregnancy and subsequent death of the female protagonist was to teach women to avoid vice, what were male readers to gain from reading about the libertine's conquests? In his article Libertine America, Leonard Tannenhouse states, "Each story leads us to expect that virtue will triumph over the lustful machinations of the libertine, only to disappoint those expectations. It is through the lack of consequences for the libertine that the reader can assume that the message the novels are sending out is that it's okay to behave as a libertine." This leads me to my argument that Hannah Webster Foster's The Coquette and Susanna Rowson's Charlotte Temple taught young male readers of the 18th century that it is permissible to behave as a libertine. In The Coquette, once Eliza is seduced by Major Sanford, she becomes ill, pregnant, isolated, and abandoned. She gives birth alone, and she and her newborn both die. And what happens to Sanford? He laments, "While my being is prolonged, I must feel the disgraceful and torturing effects of my guilt in seducing her." However, since Sanford lives the libertine lifestyle, it is skeptical as to whether or not Charlotte's death affects him to the degree of changing his ways. It is more probable that he continues his licentious behavior unscathed. Similarly, in Charlotte Temple, Charlotte is seduced and also left pregnant and alone, dying shortly after giving birth. When confronted by Montraville, Mr. Temple exclaims, "Alas, if thou wert the seducer of my child, thy own reflections be thy punishment." Again we see the libertine of the novel being cursed to a lifetime of reflection. Certainly this is not as severe as losing everything and then dying after giving birth to an illegitimate child, especially in Montraville's case, as the reader leaves him grieving in the loving arms of his wife, Julia. Here we have John Wilmot, also known as the second Earl of Rochester. He gives us a more realistic example of the consequences that come with being a libertine. John Wilmot was a well-known poet, playwright, and libertine of the 17th century. Known more intimately by King Charles II as Gentleman of the Bedchamber, his wife and 3 children lived separately from him because of his lifestyle as a libertine. After years of promiscuous sex with women other than his wife, he contracted syphilis and died at the age of 33. In 1994, Stephen Jeffries wrote the play, The Libertine, which is known as one of the 2 plays that most accurately depicts John Wilmot's life as a libertine. In 2004, Lawrence Dunmore directed the movie The Libertine, based off of the play. Maybe if the libertines of the sentimental novels had been portrayed after Wilmot's example, which we are about to see Johnny Depp convey, the rise of the libertines could have declined.
Are you unable to discharge your duties as housekeeper?
I fear this is the last, my lord.
Elizabeth, why has the cellar not been replenished?
Leave us. Leave us!
My lady.
I am ever your last resort. When your mistress has kicked you into the street and the last whore in Covent Garden refuses to attend to you, then and only then do you come to me.
I think you will never be a contented woman until you are a much respected widow. And I am hard at work on doing you that last good service.
I don't want you to die! I want you to live and live differently! Go! Stop it!
Instead of painting such a true picture of what could befall the Libertine, Rowson and Foster create these images in my mind. After losing her health and sanity, the fallen woman takes the form of a demon almost, which assists in scaring young women away from vice. Once the fallen woman has come to the end of her life, the libertine simply reflects on what has happened before continuing on with his life. The libertine is capable of repeating his actions because society allows him to. As Aaron Mackey explains, the glamour of the rake and his outlaw brothers is fabulous and residual, colored by a nostalgia for a kind of fully approved license already becoming outdated by the late 17th century, and yet one that through the centuries has retained its currency in fantasies of masculinity. A libertine maintains a sort of bad boy charm that has been effective in gaining popularity and affection for centuries. If they are not being pushed to change, why would they? Considering the aforementioned facts and examples, it is easily conceivable that, while young female readers of the 18th century were being taught to avoid vice, the men were being taught that there would be no consequences to them if they were to pursue vice. Therefore, it seems that novels such as Charlotte Temple and The Coquette were sending the message to men that it is permissible to behave as libertines.